You're listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast, hosted by Zach Bechtold and Matt Franks. If you'd like to learn more about the Bearded Theologians, you can go online at beardedtheologians.com, where we have past podcasts, blogs, and a couple items for sale. So check us out, beardedtheologians.com. Thank you for listening, and enjoy this week's show. You're listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast, hosted by Matt Franks
and Zach Bechtold. And today we have a very special guest with us, a friend and colleague of mine here from the Mountain Sky Conference. We have the Reverend Betty Nguyen, who is the Multicultural and Advocacy Ministries developer here in the Mountain Sky. Betty, thank you so much for being here with us. Would you tell our listeners a little bit about, who you are, where you come from, and what you do?
Yeah, thanks. So I am Betty, like Zach said, and I'm born and raised in Michigan. My parents are immigrants from Vietnam. Some of you may remember in the late 70s, early 80s, there was Vietnamese refugees, mostly called boat people. So I was part of that wave of refugees, part of that legacy, part of that generation. And so born and raised, lived in the Midwest most of my life and came out here to Colorado for ministry. And part of my work, this is a new position for the conference. It started in January of this year. I'm very grateful to be a part of the staff and to lean into what God might be calling us to be. And part of that is advocacy for our non-majority groups of siblings, and that could be defined in different ways, but mostly what we traditionally call ethnic ministries. And so I hope to be able to learn from and support in ways that I can at a conference level. And then also especially support churches that are considered cross-cultural, cross-racial congregations, and how to support the church, but also the clergy, especially during the beginning of a new appointment. How to lean into a new chapter in a congregation's life. We know that those appointments can be very life-giving, but because of the different culture and ethnicity or race that's in the mix, sometimes we can learn and grow together. And so I'm there as a partner in that journey. Yeah.
That's wonderful. That's big work. In any conference and in any church, but especially what seems to be out here in the Mountain Sky, where we're predominantly white, middle-class congregations and churches. And I can't speak from experience, being a white guy, but I can tell you, I've heard from our colleagues the need and the desire and the hope in the work that you're doing and embarking on, that it's huge. It makes the difference.
Yeah, I'm grateful for the opportunity. And I think the other piece too, Zach, is our conference specifically is geographically is so diverse. So when I think about cross-cultural, cross-racial, of course, there's an element of race. And culturally, we're just so diverse within our geography. And so knowing that how we can recognize our diversity and live into that and celebrate. I am Denver-centric, and so I know that I have a lot to learn, but I'm grateful to be able to serve in this capacity.
Mm-hmm. And that is an important conversation. That's in the rural ministry circles that I run in. We have that conversation about how, from the corners of Montana down to the southeast and southwest corners of Colorado, even the rural ministry cultures are night and day different.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think something that I'm learning and new for our conference is, during the pandemic, but then especially since the death of Mr. George Floyd has really challenged us as individuals, I think, and then of course as a nation, but specifically as United Methodists in our setting, what it means to live into our baptismal vows, to what it means to be anti-racist. And so this has now become part of our work. And I'm grateful that we're embarking on this work more intentionally, And we can talk about the pilgrimage in a little bit, but then I'm also, I guess, I don't know if embarrassed is the right word, but perhaps it was back burner. We always knew that we're not fully anti-racist, but it wasn't on the front of our minds, I think. And so now we're having to face the work that we really have to do. And so I hope that we can not only lean to it now, but then keep it at the forefront, because I really believe anti-racism work is not just a one and done. It's not a short period of time, but it's an ongoing journey. Yeah, and so what does it mean for us as United Methodists, as Christians, as people within a community? What does that look like? And then also recognizing that, again, our geography is so wide and diverse. How do we recognize that uniqueness and then also bring this work into the various different areas within our community, our conference? Yeah.
Well, and like Zach said, being at such a great distance of I just think of like the geographic area that you have alone, the challenges that can occur, even like, I mean, and those areas tend to have a great deal of migrants, whether it be, I think of like the Native American communities that get lost in translation and lost in conversation in regards to the Methodist Church. And, we think about some of the issues that we have here in Oklahoma. Oklahoma has, we have the Oklahoma Indian Missionary Conference, and yet like the two conferences really, we may share a bishop, but we don't share any space together and working together. And there's several of us like myself who are hoping to bridge that gap, like bridge those conversations and see like where those things can occur. Like how can we fix those, like kind of heal some of those wounds that may be there. Especially like like you talk about the Native American community, especially like, you all like your conference has a like really bad issue. Like
Yeah,
all of them do. Like, I'm sure if we deep down, we could find all of them, but like yours has definitely a specific one.
Yeah.
And I think that's always, unless people know that history, it does get lost in translation, in conversation. And so like having someone like you that can help direct and guide those conversations, I think is very helpful and fruitful for those smaller congregations who wouldn't have ever thought about it otherwise, not even realizing that, like thinking about that they could minister with the reservation up the street who may be suffering from whatever it is that's going on. It's great to have a position like that. And so like, what's kind of something you hope to draw out of this with what you're getting to do?
Yeah. So I guess I'll respond in three things. One, I know we've been kind of pointing to the pilgrimage to the land of love. So I'll just share real quickly what that's about. So our conference is initiating a pilgrimage, embarking on this journey this Sunday, and it'll go through towards the end of November. And so my hope out of this pilgrimage is daily engagement with the vast resources, which I try to curate with the wisdom of others, so that we're engaged in different voices and education, and then also tapping in and into our own reactions. I think anti-racism work really needs to begin internally and building a capacity for compassion. I think that's so important, because I know we want to go to action, we want to make a difference, but our souls will be drained if we don't tend to that first, and to stretch those muscles of compassion so that we have the capacity to do that for the long term. So long story short, the pilgrimage is daily engagement, starting out with very simple steps, listening to music and poetry, and ending with thinking about it, implicit bias, microaggressions, and that. So all that to say, if anybody's interested, anyone is welcome to participate in that pilgrimage. But to answer too, Matt, I think there's a few things that come to mind is that connection that you're talking about, that building bridges. I think that one of the white dominant value that I see, and I know I'm a part of, is that we have so much to do. And busyness is kind of part of our DNA as white dominant culture. some of this work, I think, requires us to slow down and carve out space to build that bridge. And it's going to be slow. And so I think that's part of my task, is to hopefully create some of that space. Because we are so busy, and we have front burner things, right, all the time. And so I hope that through my role, but then also as a colleague, a person within community, is to create that space. And I'm learning. I am a Pollyanna people pleaser kind of person. And so sometimes, for better or worse, right? But I have always lived with this mantra of creating safe space. But lately, I've been learning that safe space is not enough. It's a brave space. And I think, how do we create space where people can come and listen deeply, and then to also speak boldly? And I think that's hard. And carving out time and space to create that is part of the work. I've learned a new term that has been very helpful. I know for me as a person of color and an introvert, the term is make space, take space. And so how do we learn and live into that? And I think building bridges require all of those resources in our toolbox. The other thing is, I don't know why I wrote this down, but as I was listening to you, Matt, about the diversity of our community, is that sometimes the people are there, but we haven't been able to see the people. And so, like Matt, you said, you talked about specifically our Native American brothers and sisters, right? I know in our conference here in the Mountain Sky area, we have Native American siblings, Hispanic Latino siblings who are in our communities, but we can't see, or we have not seen, or have failed to see, or whatever the case is. And so even in very predominantly white spaces, the work still needs to be done. And maybe there are people in our midst that we have not seen. And so how do we kind of create an opportunity for us to take away that myth, right? Of like, oh, we're just an all white community. It doesn't impact us, and take that myth away. And so we can really see what's going on. So those are the few things that kind of came up for me. I don't know if it answered any questions or thoughts that you had, but
no, I think it did good, because you even brought up a point of like not being aware of people who are in our own backyard. And like one of the things that I share with with people that I talk to is that like I'm in the heart of the Cherokee Nation. Like literally, we are in the capital of the Cherokee Nation here in Tahlequah. But we have a growing Hispanic population, and like 25% are in the schools right now. And so like when I say that, people are like, oh wow, like, because I've been talking about like maybe create or building some bridges to the Hispanic community that have a space for them, because it's not necessarily prevalent in the community. And like people are like, we didn't realize there were that many in the schools. I'm like, yeah, like, and that's where like getting to know like some of those demographic things that we look at that are important, but just like even just like looking out in the community and like realizing that like it's not what we think it is. And I think it's that kind of work sometimes gets put, like, I like how you said this, on the back burner, and it's not on the forefront, because there's so many things in the forefront. But like, and like you said, with the death of George Floyd, a lot of this kind of got brought up to the forefront. You had that on top of the COVID, on top of everything else that's happened. It's like, how do we deal with this? And that's where we need people like you who can help like drive this conversation. Or like, if I were in your annual conference, I'd probably be calling you and say, hey, Betty, I would love for you to help us with this.
Sure. Yeah.
I think
call anytime. We're connectional.
Yeah. Well, I know, but you're appointed and located not in my annual conference, and I would hate to like get us in trouble saying, she's got to work for us. Like I know how those contests work. But I think we just hired somebody to do this similar work in our annual. I hope I can't remember. It's been hard for me to keep track of who's being hired in the conference.
Yeah.
I know there's some heart for that in our annual conference as well, but like, it's great that your annual conference has like taken this up to be done. And I've been keeping up with that pilgrimage. It sounds really interesting, and would encourage people. We'll have a link to that in our website for people to connect into to check it out, and would strongly encourage people to do it, because I think it's going to be a good thing. And no, you don't have to check your annual conference at the door. You can you can come in from other annual conferences. From what I understand.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to say, another thing about the pilgrimage too is that for people who've been thinking about anti-racism work or have been doing it, may feel like, oh, I'm beyond this, right? And there's some people who are coming into this kind of like, oh, kind of scary. This is their first step. So I think the point of the pilgrimage is that regardless of where we're at, that we're kind of doing this together and that we can learn from one another. And for those of us who've been doing this work, to remember that there's always continued learning. Like for me, I can engage in the same documents, the same tools, the same resources, hear the same voices. But every time I listen to it again, read it again, something new kind of comes up, and so I just wanted to say that, because I know that there is that tension that we need to live in, like internal work and that external, work, and they both are important to engage in. And I really wanted to mention, I appreciated what you say, Matt. It made me think of two things. One is that own backyard, and then also connected to the wider connection, like I think when we think about anti-racism context, but then also we're so connected. Like I think about this all the time about when I eat, and I love eating and I love cooking, so I think about it all the time, is that, a migrant worker most likely picked the tomatoes I ate, or helped prepare the steak that I consumed, and not take that for granted that, there are people who are usually on the margins making all these things possible. And so there's that also, focus into the local community, but then we're so connected. So even though we might be in a predominantly white community, we're still connected with diverse groups of people through our daily needs and interactions. Yeah, whether it's evident or not. Yeah.
Right. And I think that's one thing that's so important for us to remember, because a lot of the communities every community can claim some sort of isolation, right? That we're here and everybody else is out here, regardless of the size of whether you're in Denver or rural Montana or Oklahoma, wherever, right? We claim some kind of isolation, especially when larger events take place. And you talk about the anti-racism work. I can't tell you how many places I've lived in this country, and I've gone and people say we did that. We beat that. We're not racist here. We don't have to do that work anymore. All the things that are happening are over there. But I think that's where the anti-racism work begins, is acknowledging, oh no, we still have things here, but we're also connected to that thing over there. We're still connected to George Floyd. We're connected to migrant workers. We're connected to all of these things. We may not see it right here, or the event may not have happened right here, but we are connected. And I think that's something that is super important to remember when we create that brave space, is creating that space for us to name that of, oh, we still have that embedded racism. We still have that embedded thing here. There's nothing to win. We have not won. We have not ended racism. It's still prevalent in our community, in our country, in our society, in the world. In working towards, I have appreciated very much the language of anti-racism work, especially here recently, of, oh no, there's still a lot more to be done, and we are so connected with what's going on beyond what we see and what we feel.
Yeah, I think one thing that I think I mentioned earlier to Matt, that I'm not the most creative person, but recently someone had challenged me to tap into my imagination. And I think that there's a holy practice in that sometimes we're stuck in our spaces and we can't imagine what God is calling us into. And so when we think about God's kingdom, beloved community, what holy imagination can come up in our midst, because we're kind of stuck, and so when we have conversations like, Zach, you mentioned, oh, we've already done that, or isn't it better than it was? Sure, but does it mean that there's no more work to do, right? And so we cannot get stuck. And how do we continue to engage and live into that new place, that God is calling us? And I'll mention some of folks have seen Jasper, Reverend Jasper Peter mentioned that there's not reconciliation because it wasn't reconciled in the first place, but we're building something new that God is calling us. And so how do we create capacity to have that imagination so that we're not stuck? And then, you know, kind of front burner, back burner thing, I want to confess that, you know, this is my work, so I think about it all the time. You know, it's kind of like, you know, consumes me, and I feel like I still have so much more to learn. And so I'm always like, you know, telling colleagues, let's get on this bandwagon. You know, how can I help you? And then recently I read an article, and I apologize, I don't remember, but it was kind of passed around on Facebook in clergy circles about the stress of a clergy person at this time, you know, like COVID, masks, no masks, this is too political, that's not political enough. And then it made me realize, oh my gosh, okay, Betty, you know, am I contributing to like kind of the stress, right? And so it reminded me that we have to do this together, right? And so, yes, there's responsibility as a spiritual leader to guide and to lead and to be prophetic, but you don't have to do it alone, that we can do this together, because it's important, but it's a lot, right? And so we can't do it in isolation. Yeah. So those are some of the things I've kind of been thinking as we're sharing here.
Yeah, and that's been a conversation I've had lately in my congregation, because like there's a lot that want to have that conversation, and like I don't have the energy. I can't. I mean, I'm struggling enough to, you know, do this new style of worship and like maintaining that, and on top of all the like new things that we're having to do, and I want to have those conversations, but man, I don't have the energy. And so like I've been asking people like, hey, if you want to have this conversation, like I will resource you to have it. But I can't, like I can be there, but I can't be the one driving the conversation right now. And that's led to some really good honest conversation about utilizing other resources that are available. And so I've been a real big proponent of pushing those resources on, and like saying, hey, look at these resources. If you have questions, I'll be glad to help you or direct you or guide you. But in order for like I can't have that conversation right now, but I'm willing to. It's just I don't have the energy and like you lifted up. Like, man, it's hard to like try to schedule that one in, and like I want to, but it's finding space. And so like when a conference offers something like what you all are doing with the pilgrimage, like, man, like go, please, like that would be a great space for people that are interested in this to be connected to it. And you know, like then if you finish that and you want to talk, I'm here for you. And I think that's that those possibilities within our own denomination are so huge. You look at what the General Church and Society is doing right now with their 30 days of anti-racism campaign that they've got going. And like, man, you want to talk about an easy way to help, you know, have that conversation without like having to, you know, try to get people to tune into a Zoom meeting or whatever, however else you all do it. You know, like it's not a bad way to do it. And so like, you know, being able to be resourced. And I think that's been a lot of the problem, is having good, healthy resources to help have the conversations.
Yeah. No, that's important. When we first started the pilgrimage, we didn't think about, consider at that point, a debrief time. But then as we continued to do this, and with the wisdom of, you know, others, like, no, we really need to have space for conversation. And I think, you know, literally resources on the tip of our finger, you know, at the, what is the term? Tip of our fingers, right? And we can Google, and we can read and look, but having resources that is looked through or curated, but then also have space to discuss and process is helpful. So yeah, and I have to be honest, you know, Denver Centric, I mentioned that earlier, and as I'm listening to our colleagues and hearing the struggles, because a colleague said, Betty, now that you're in the staff, maybe you have forgotten, but it's exhausting, you know, coming up with a sermon every week in the midst of pandemic, how to put together, you know, a worship, all these things, and then being challenged by the congregation, you know, from so many different ways. And it really humbled me, you know, like, wow, there is so much in this time and space, and how can we do this together? So clearly, you know, we need to to do that. And I would say that is part of our, dominant culture. Is like, we got to fix it, we got to do it, we got to lead it, and how can we just, trust in one another to lean into each other's gifts and graces, and support one another.
And I think that's something that we forget, not only as pastors and leaders, but as lay people in our congregations, is that we don't have to do it all ourselves. That especially if you just take a look at the Methodist Church, we're connectional and we're in this together. And we've done a poor job over the last however many years of actually being connectional and doing this together. And so we get in that rut of the individualistic, I'm going to lead my churches and preach my sermons and go on. And when an opportunity like this comes together, that to truly be connectional, and where I can go as a pastor with my congregation members or the conference or everybody that's showing up to this, and just be present and be present in the work with each other, is almost exhausting to think about, because you're like, oh, well, I don't have time for that. I can't do that. I'm not leading it, but then you go, oh, we're in this together. And so we're doing the work, the work isn't as much and as overwhelming as it seems to be, whether that's inside a pilgrimage or doing anti-racism work or creating space. When we branch out and remember that we have people, that we are together and don't have to do everything on our own, it not only makes the work more meaningful, but it makes the time together so much more impactful. And I think that's something we forget, just as people all together, that we don't have to do it alone.
Yeah. And I think another piece to that too is kind of goes back to give space, take space, or make space, take space, is the practice of the church to lead, but also be humble to follow the leadership of others. And I'm not saying about the pilgrimage, just in general, if a community wants to engage in anti-racism work, are there community leaders already in organizations where we can learn from? We have, as Christians, a strong and many times very powerful witness of leading, right? Like in our Methodist tradition of hospitals and schools and all these things. And that is celebrated, but then at the same time, sometimes that leads into taking so much space that we have not followed the leadership of others. And so that can apply to organizations, but especially marginalized people, right? Like, how can we be followers, and truly follow the lead of those who are directly impacted, whatever, if we're talking about immigration, racism, anything, are we willing to follow the leadership of those who are, quite frankly, I want to follow the leadership of people who know more experience or are directly impacted in ways that are different from me. And also just realizing that, gosh, sometimes we don't have all the answers, and so can we learn from, and yeah.
Sure. Well, and how do we not recreate the wheel, right? I think we see that so much in the church with poverty ministries, food pantries, clothing pantries, things like that. We see the need as a church and a community and jump on it to try to meet the need, rather than looking around going, who's already doing the work? And how can we support and follow with them in this work? And just wear ourselves out and make our resources thin and our energy thin, all because we didn't reach out and say, hey, you're already doing this, how do we help?
Yeah.
And I think that's like the important work that we need. Like, I think with local churches and clergy need to like there are people doing amazing things out there, and a lot of them would be willing to work with you. All you have to do is ask. And I think that's like where your position comes into, is getting yourself out there for your annual conference, to know what's going on and what's available and what can be available and what is out there. Because like, I know as someone who served in a small church out, and out in the boons of Oklahoma, connecting into those conference resources were so key, and I understood they exist, whereas a lot of our local pastors or even our churches don't even know that these things exist. And having that space to say, like, look, these things are available for you to connect into. I think that's important. Just recognition on your part, and hopefully that there are churches in your annual conference listening to this that can tap in to what you're doing, and make it a thing, and that they don't have to have, that there are, I mean, we've shared this a number of times, that there are resources available for them to follow, and they don't have to recreate the rules we've said a couple times. You feel like there's anything else you want to share with us as we're going through this?
For me, you mean?
Yeah, just whatever. I mean, just in general.
I'll just say that when it comes to anti-racism work, I just want to emphasize the power of white siblings talking to white siblings. As I've been in contact and conversation with clergy and laity and people in different spaces, there is a desire to hear from our siblings of color, right? Our BIPOC siblings. And there is power in that, and we definitely need to create space for that. But I also am recognizing that sometimes our white siblings do not recognize the power of speaking with other white siblings to encourage to do the work. So it is a little different, right? So conversations with our BIPOC siblings to learn and to follow their leadership, all these important things, but that white siblings talking with other white siblings about what they've learned, engaging them to do this work too, is very powerful. I've been very moved as I've been in conversation, especially with older white siblings who have said, well, I can't be at a protest. I can't be out there. What can I do now? You know, and I can read, I can do all these things, but what else can I do? And I said, you know, your voice talking to a friend, a family member about sharing what you've learned is probably one of the most effective and meaningful and can be so transformative. So I just wanted to say that as an encouragement and a call to action, and I know it's not always easy. Because these are difficult things, and when you're talking with people you love and you care, who especially don't agree with you, it can be very risky. But know that there is an opportunity there, and how important that is.
Absolutely. And I appreciate, because I've been on that end of the conversation with you, of that, what do I have to say here? I don't know that my voice is needed, and your encouragement and affirmation of, no, speak up. We all need to speak up and create and take that space in the appropriate manners is so important. Because I get in my head about that as bad as anybody else of, I can't talk about this, not because I don't want to, but do I have a voice in it, being a white guy? In your encouragement to say, yeah, talk to your people, be in your people's ear, be that voice for them when they won't listen to anybody else or don't have anybody else to listen to is so important. And then remembering to make that space when my voice isn't needed, right? I think is kind of the way I've come to learn how to approach it. Remembering when is when.
Yeah.
I think that's a kind of or go ahead, and Betty, unless you have something else to add.
No.
I think that's kind of a good place to land our plane today, because we can definitely go in circles on this for hours. And I've enjoyed the conversation today. It's made me think about a few things on how to, not only in my annual conference, but how can we tap into other annual conferences that might be doing even better work or actually work in regards to these issues. And so we'll have a website from Betty to share with you about the pilgrimage, and then maybe other things like, and just get that to Zach, and we'll be glad to share it through our website. Betty, we thank you for your time. And so
thank you.
For the Bearded Theologians, I'm Matt Franks.
I'm Zach Bechtold. Thanks for checking us out.
First, guys, I want you to subscribe and like this video and push that thumbs up.
Thank you for listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share on all social media outlets. You can check out old episodes and more information at beardedtheologians.com. Thanks for checking us out.